Right now, inside your body, like right this very second, a microscopic cascade failure is taking place.
Yeah, and it's definitely not an illness or an accident for that matter.
Right. It is a highly orchestrated, system-wide sequence of biological errors, and it's happening in literally every single one of your cells simultaneously.
It really is the ultimate domino effect. I mean, we often think of aging as this, vague, mysterious ticking clock.
Getting older.
Exactly. But biologically speaking, it is a very specific, measurable breakdown of machinery.
And that is exactly what we are plunging into today for this deep dive. Our mission here is to just, well, cut completely through the noise.
Which there is a lot of.
Oh, totally. If you look online, there are thousands of anti-aging fads, serums, miracle diets, you name it. We are looking past all of that marketing today.
Yeah, we're going straight to the scientific consensus.
Right, specifically a landmark 2013 biological framework, and then its massive 2023 update that mapped out what researchers officially call the hallmarks of aging.
Yeah, we're going to look at the actual undeniable biochemical changes that dictate exactly why and how the human body breaks down over time.
But to really ground this, we need to establish what actually qualifies as a hallmark in this framework, right? Because they didn't just throw stuff on a list.
No, not at all. The researchers were incredibly strict about this. For a biological process to be an official hallmark of aging, it has to meet 3 very specific premises.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, it has to manifest naturally during normal aging, so everybody gets it. Second, if you experimentally dial up this process in a lab organism, it has to actually accelerate their aging.
So if you force the mechanism to happen, the organism just ages faster.
Exactly, they get older quicker.
Yeah.
And then the third premise is kind of the holy grail. If you experimentally fix or amend this specific process, it has to slow normal aging and actually increase healthy lifespan.
Right, though science is still desperately working on that last one for humans.
Very much so. But that is the defining criteria for the list.
And I want to say right up front to you, the listener, that we are not framing this as some depressing inevitability.
No, not at all.
This is a fascinating, under-the-hood look at your own biology. It is basically the ultimate user's manual to the human machine.
It really is. And to make sense of it all, biologists group these hallmarks into 3 distinct categories.
Yeah, I like to think of it as a crumbling empire.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right, because first you have the initial invaders,
Yeah.
the primary causes. Then you have your own army going rogue, so the body's backfiring defenses. And finally, you have the total supply chain collapse, which is the systemic failure.
That is a perfect framework for visualizing this, because the whole process relies entirely on causality. Like one failure directly triggers the next.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the foundation.
Yeah.
The empire's invaders, the
Yeah.
primary hallmarks.
Right.
According to the research, these are the root causes of cellular damage, and it all starts with genome instability. Basically, our DNA is taking physical hits every single second, right?
Constantly. I mean, abnormal chemical structures form in your DNA thousands of times a day.
Thousands.
Thousands. And this happens partly from environmental factors like, UV radiation from the sun, but mostly it's from oxidative stress.
Which is just from living, right?
Yeah, it's just a natural toxic byproduct of your own cells producing energy. Now, your cells do have a massive molecular repair crew that works around the clock to fix these structural breaks.
But over decades, that repair crew just kind of gets overwhelmed.
Exactly. Unrepaired errors start to accumulate, and the actual genetic code gets corrupted.
Right. And this directly triggers the second primary hallmark, which is epigenomic alterations. And I have to say, this one completely blew my mind.
It's wild, isn't it?
It really is. Because if your genome is the master instruction manual for your body, epigenetics is essentially the system of sticky notes and paper clips telling the cell which pages to actually read.
Yeah, think about the physics of a cell for a second. Your DNA chain is roughly 2 meters long, but it has to be stuffed inside a microscopic nucleus.
Which is insane to picture.
It is. And to fit, it has to be tightly spooled around these proteins called histones. Depending on what a specific cell needs to do, it physically unspools certain sections of that DNA to turn specific genes on and keeps the rest tightly clamped shut.
Right, so a skin cell has the exact same DNA as a liver cell. It's just reading different pages of the manual.
Precisely. And the researchers highlight a specific set of proteins called sirtuins.
Okay, so these are the paper clips.
Exactly. They bind the DNA onto the histones to keep the unneeded genes permanently turned off. But to do their job, sirtuins require a cellular fuel source, a molecule called NAD.
And here is the direct causal link from the first hallmark. As you age, your cells are taking so much DNA damage that they consume massive amounts of NAD just trying to power the repair enzyme.
Yep. The repair crew takes all the fuel.
So because the cell's battery drains trying to fix the DNA, the NAD levels drop. And because NAD drops, the sirtuins lose their fuel. The paper clips literally fall off.
They lose their grip. So the DNA unspools into total chaos. Genes that are supposed to be permanently turned off start waking up, and genes that should be on get suppressed.
Your cells literally lose their identity.
Exactly. You end up with like a skin cell that is suddenly trying to produce liver enzymes. It's just cellular confusion.
Wow. But the most famous primary hallmark has to be telomere shortening. I know everyone always uses the shoelace analogy for this.
Oh, the iGlix.
Yeah. Comparing telomeres to the little plastic tips at the ends of our chromosomes. But it really is the best way to visualize it.
It is, because it perfectly explains the mechanical limitation.
Yeah.
Every time a cell divides, its DNA replication machinery has to copy the chromosome, but it physically cannot copy all the way to the very tip.
So the tiny piece gets left behind.
Right. A tiny piece of that protective telomere gets sliced off with every single division.
Like a fuse burning down.
Exactly.
The biologist Leonard Hayflick discovered that a normal human cell can only divide 40 to 60 times before that protective tip completely wears away.
The Hayflick limit.
Right. And once the telomere is gone, the cell just stops dividing altogether. But here is where I get genuinely confused by the research.
Okay, what's that?
The research shows that our bodies actually possess an enzyme called telomerase.
Yeah.
And its entire job is to magically elongate those telomeres in our stem cells.
Yeah.
Basically putting fresh plastic tips back on the shoelaces.
Yeah, it rebuilds them.
So if we have the blueprint for this enzyme, why doesn't our body just pump all of our normal cells full of telomerase to stop aging forever?
What's fascinating here is that the body is making a very calculated, very dangerous evolutionary trade-off.
How so?
Well, yes, if your telomeres wear down, your tissues eventually lose the ability to regenerate. But think about what happens if a cell can divide endlessly without its telomeres ever wearing down.
It just keeps multiplying.
Right. Uncontrolled infinite cell division is essentially the clinical definition of cancer.
Oh, wow. So we're basically trading eternal youth for not getting tumors every time we scrape a knee.
Pretty much. That 40 to 60 division limit is a built-in kill switch. The body uses telomere shortening to put a strict speed limit on cell proliferation, so mutated cells cannot easily grow into runaway tumors.
It's an evolutionary defense mechanism.
Exactly. A defense against cancer.
Which perfectly transitions us into the second major category of our deep dive, the antagonistic hallmarks. Because when this primary damage occurs, when the DNA mutates and the telomeres burn down, the body doesn't just surrender.
No, it fights back.
Right. But over time, this rogue army of defense mechanisms backfires, and it actually becomes the main driver of aging.
This is where we really start to see the complex machinery of the cell working against itself. And one of the most critical antagonistic hallmarks is deregulated nutrient sensing.
Let's get into this, because this directly relates to a lot of the diet trends listeners might be familiar with right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Cells have pathways to sense macronutrients. And the researchers focus heavily on a specific biological pathway called mTOR.
Right, mTOR is huge.
When times are good and nutrients are abundant, mTOR acts like a green light. It induces growth, protein synthesis, and, cell building.
But when food is scarce, a different sensor called AMPK detects the drop in energy and slams the brakes on mTOR to conserve resources.
And this is crucial, because when mTOR is turned off, the cell stops building and starts cleaning house.
Exactly. It begins recycling damaged parts to survive the perceived famine.
So if you've ever wondered why intermittent fasting is such a massive trend right now, this is the exact biochemical reason. You are trying to trigger AMPK to hit the brakes on mTOR, forcing your cells into repair mode.
Which is great for cellular cleanup.
But I find a massive irony here. In a growing child, you absolutely want mTOR upregulated for growth. But wait, so the exact same mTOR pathway that helps us grow and thrive when we are young actually accelerates aging and cancer incidence if it remains overactive in a fully grown adult.
Precisely. If you forcibly overactivate mTOR in adult mice in a lab, it drastically shortens their lifespan.
That's crazy.
Conversely, interventions that inhibit mTOR like strict caloric restriction or administering an immunosuppressive drug called rapamycin have been shown to be incredibly robust at extending lifespan across multiple species.
But why would evolution design a pathway that actively kills us later in life?
Because from an evolutionary standpoint, Nature doesn't really care what happens to you after you've successfully reproduced and raised your offspring.
Ouch. Good point.
Yeah, evolution rigorously selects for pathways that promote rapid early life growth like MTOR. It completely ignores late life maintenance. Biologists actually call this antagonistic pleiotropy.
Antagonistic pleiotropy.
Right. It means a gene that is highly beneficial in youth becomes actively detrimental in old age.
The ultimate double-edged sword. And this ties directly into another major defense mechanism that fails, which is the loss of proteostasis.
Yeah, protein failure.
Basically, proteins are the physical workers of the cell. And to function, they have to be folded into very specific 3D shapes. I think of it like highly complex cellular origami.
That's exactly what it is. But due to the primary DNA damage we discussed earlier, the instructions for the origami get corrupted.
Right. But if these proteins are misfolding and just becoming useless junk, where does all that microscopic trash actually go? Does the cell just fill up with garbage?
Eventually, yeah, it does. Normally, special helper proteins try to refold them or chop them up for recycling, but as we age, those systems fail.
So the trash just piles up.
Exactly. The misfolded proteins start sticking together, clumping into these toxic aggregates. This is actually a major hallmark of severe neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's.
Wow.
And at the same time, the power plants of the cell, the mitochondria, start to leak.
Mitochondrial dysfunction. The power plants lose their efficiency.
Right. So instead of cleanly burning fuel, they start spewing toxic exhaust, which are reactive oxygen species. And that triggers widespread inflammatory alarms.
Which creates the perfect storm for the most insidious antagonistic hallmark of all. Cellular senescence.
Ah,
The zombie cells. This was honestly the wildest part of the research for me. Earlier, we talked about how cells stop dividing when their telomeres get too short, or if their DNA takes too much damage.
right. The kill switch.
Normally, a severely damaged cell will trigger apoptosis. It gracefully self-destructs for the good of the organism so a healthy cell can take its place. But senescent cells just refuse to do that.
They exit the cell cycle entirely. They aren't dividing like a cancer cell, but they refuse to die. They just sit there dormant.
But it's so much worse than them just taking up space. These zombie cells start secreting a highly toxic distress signal, this cocktail of inflammatory molecules called the SASP.
Senescence-associated secretory phenotype.
Right, and this SASP acts like a poison that actually induces senescence in the healthy neighboring cells around it.
It literally infects the surrounding tissue. In our youth, the immune system is programmed to hunt down and clear out these rare senescent cells.
Like specialized zombie hunters.
Exactly. But as we age, the immune system weakens, and the zombies start to outnumber the hunters. And the research shows that if you use targeted drugs to clear out these senescent cells in older mice, it dramatically delays the onset of age-related physical decline.
That is incredible. Which
Yeah.
brings us to the inevitable conclusion of all this microscopic warfare. The final category. The integrative hallmarks.
The system failure.
Right. The initial invaders breached the walls, the rogue army of defenses backfired, and eventually you get a systemic supply chain collapse across the whole body.
And this is where the underlying cellular chaos finally translates into the visible signs of aging we all recognize. Stem cell exhaustion is a massive driver of this.
Because your stem cells are your reserve troops. They sit in tissues like the skin, the gut lining, and the bone marrow, just waiting to divide and replenish damaged cells.
But because of everything we just discussed, the telomere shortening, the DNA damage, the toxic zombie cells surrounding them, the reserve troops are totally depleted.
The proportion of healthy stem cells plummets, and the ones left divide incredibly slowly.
Right, so the tissue just loses its ability to rebuild itself. And compounding that local failure is a global failure. Altered intercellular communication.
Basically, the way the different organs talk to each other breaks down. I kept thinking of it like a town's fire alarm system.
Okay, I like that.
The normal role of inflammation is like calling the fire department to a specific, localized house fire, say, a cut on your finger.
Sure.
But in the aging body, you develop what biologists call inflammaging. Because of all those zombie cells screaming their toxic SASP signals, it's like chronic, low-grade fire alarms are constantly ringing in every single neighborhood simultaneously.
And when the alarms never turn off, your firefighters, your immune cells become completely exhausted. They start destroying healthy tissue as collateral damage in a fight that never actually ends.
Now, up to this point, we've been working mostly off the original 2013 framework. But in 2023, the researchers realized the picture was even more complex, and they officially updated the model.
Right. They expanded it from 9 hallmarks to 12.
They explicitly added chronic inflammation, which we just discussed, but they also added two major systemic failures, macrotophagy and dysbiosis.
Macrotophagy is fascinating because it loops right back to our discussion about misfolded proteins.
The cellular trash.
Exactly. Autophagy is the cell's internal recycling center. It is the mechanism that bags up the cellular trash and dissolves it.
So when macrotophagy declines, the cellular garbage trucks literally go on strike.
Yep. The toxic protein clumps just sit there, paralyzing the cell.
And then there's dysbiosis, which is the breakdown of our microbiome. We hear a lot about gut health online, but the 2023 update clarifies exactly why it's a hallmark of aging.
It isn't just about having bad digestion.
Right. Your gut microbiome is a massive symbiotic barrier. As we age, that specific community of bacteria changes, the intestinal barrier weakens, and actual bacterial toxins leak into the bloodstream.
It's essentially a breach. The gut starts communicating a state of panic to the rest of the body, heavily driving that global inflammaging we talked about.
It is a perfect example of how a localized issue in the gut drives a systemic failure everywhere else. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, this is the best part.
The 2023 update also notes further cutting-edge hallmarks that are currently being intensely studied. And one of them sounds like pure science fiction.
It really does.
The resurrection of endogenous retroviruses.
This is staggering discovery, and it connects several of our hallmarks together perfectly.
To explain this to the listener, about 8% of the human genome is actually made up of ancient viral DNA.
Which is just a crazy fact on its own.
Millions of years ago, retroviruses infected our evolutionary ancestors. And over time, their genetic code just became permanently embedded in our own DNA. It's supposed to be dead code, kept permanently dormant.
But remember the primary hallmark we discussed earlier, epigenomic alterations.
Yes, the paperclips falling off.
Exactly.
As our cells take damage and the NAD battery drains, the sirtuin paperclips lose their grip on the genome. And when the DNA unspools, those ancient viral sequences are no longer clamped shut.
They wake up.
They wake up. These ancient retroviruses actually start transcribing themselves inside our modern cells.
They awaken, and the cell's immune sensors detect this viral material. The cell thinks it's under an active viral attack, which drives massive inflammation and pushes the cell directly into senescence.
We are literally being aged, in part, by ancient viruses hiding inside our own genetic code.
It sounds like a movie plot. And interestingly, researchers have noted that neutralizing these awakened viruses with specific antiretroviral therapies can actually block aspects of tissue aging in animal models.
It's unbelievable. It really drives home how insanely complex, yet mechanically logical, this entire process is.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the researchers highlight an alternative framework that runs parallel to the hallmarks. It's called the 7 Pillars of Aging.
Okay, what does that model focus on?
What it emphasizes above all else is the deep, inescapable interconnectedness of these biological mechanisms. You cannot isolate the epigenetics from the misfolded proteins or the zombie cells from the stem cell exhaustion.
Right, it's not a checklist you just cross off one by one. It's a single tangled web.
Precisely. But the silver lining of that interconnectedness is that targeting one failure often treats the others.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The research demonstrates that if you therapeutically improve the lifespan mechanisms in one specific tissue, say the liver, you actually slow down the aging process in completely different tissues, like the brain or the muscles.
Because the signaling molecules, the communication, improves across the whole board.
Exactly.
If you finally fix the fire alarm in one neighborhood, the whole town benefits.
They are entirely interdependent.
So what does this all mean? We started by talking about the body like a crumbling empire, and it is clear that aging is not just a mysterious, unstoppable passage of time.
No, it's really not.
It is a categorizable sequence of events. It is the slow accumulation of DNA hits and the failure of our epigenetic paperclips. It's the burning down of our chromosomal fuses.
It's the invasion of toxic zombie cells, the constant ringing of immune system fire alarms, and, the awakening of ancient viruses.
It is simply biology operating exactly as evolution designed it to, prioritizing rapid early life growth and leaving the maintenance crew entirely underfunded in the later years.
It's a harsh reality, but that's evolution for you.
Exactly. And understanding these 12 distinct mechanisms is the absolute first step for you, the listener, to evaluate any longevity, diet, or medical information you encounter out there.
Because there's a lot of misinformation.
Tons of it. But whether you're looking at intermittent fasting and MTOR or a supplement targeting NAD, you don't have to just accept getting older as a vague concept anymore. You now know the actual biochemical blueprint of what is happening under the hood.
This raises an important question, one that I think reshapes how we view our entire future as a species.
What's that?
We mentioned at the very beginning that the third defining premise of a hallmark of aging is the opportunity to decelerate, stop, or even reverse it through therapeutic interventions.
The ability to actually fix the machine.
Right. But think about the profound philosophical implication of that premise. If biological aging is not an inevitable mystical law of the universe, if it is merely a specific checklist of 12 treatable biochemical errors, what happens when science eventually learns how to cure those errors?
Like curing any other disease.
Exactly. Just like we learn to cure bacterial infections with antibiotics or fix a broken bone, what happens to human identity, to the structure of society, and to the very concept of a lifespan when aging is no longer an absolute, terrifying certainty, but rather a manageable medical condition?
A world where the cascade failure can be paused, where the cellular garbage is cleared, the genetic paperclips hold strong, and the biological clock stops ticking.
It changes everything.
That is a wild, paradigm-shifting thought to leave off on.
We've mapped out exactly how the engine wears itself out. Now we just have to wait and see if we can finally invent the ultimate mechanic.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is pretty simple. We plunge into these colossal subjects and try to pull out the essential, the surprising, the stuff you really need to know. And today, we are taking on a true global titan. I mean, this is a place that kind of defies description. It's built on prophecy, on ruins. It's constantly adapting, and it's literally sinking.
It is.
We are deep diving into Mexico City, or as the 20-plus million people who live there call it, CDMX.
It really is a capital of transformation. I think to understand Mexico City, you just have to accept that every single layer of its history is present all at once.
Right.
You're exploring a city founded by one of the greatest empires in the Americas, then systematically destroyed and rebuilt by the Spanish, all while sitting on a geological time bomb.
So what's our objective today? What are we trying to unpack?
I think our goal is to explore that layered identity, really analyze its precarious geography, and then understand its role as this undeniable economic and cultural powerhouse in the 21st century.
Okay, so when we talk about global capitals, this isn't just a big city. It's a monumental center of influence. Where does it actually rank?
It ranks extremely high. There's a group, the Globalization and World Cities Research Network, GandM, and they monitor how cities fit into the global economy. In their 2024 ranking, they classify Mexico City as an alpha world city.
An alpha world city. So that puts it up there with places like Paris, Tokyo.
Exactly. Paris, Tokyo, Sydney, it's in that top tier. And in terms of sheer scale, Greater Mexico City has about 21.8 million people.
Wow.
That makes it the 6th largest metro area on the planet. And the city proper, just the core city, is the most populous in all of North America.
That immediately just frames the challenge of trying to manage a place like that. For decades, most of us knew it as the DF, right? The Distrito Federal. But that name change to CDMX, that signaled a really profound shift.
It absolutely did. The initials DF were common for a century, but the big political and legal change happened in January 2016. It officially went from being the federal district to Ciudad de Mexico, CDMX. And this was so much more than just a rebranding. It was the result of decades of political struggle to give the city more autonomy. It now has its own constitution, much more like a federal state.
And the city's identity is captured in these two sort of contrasting nicknames. There's the formal, almost regal one, and then the more modern local term.
The regal one is La Ciudad de los Palacios, the City of Palaces.
The City of Palaces.
Yeah, and it dates back to the early 19th century. The famous Prussian explorer Baron Alexander von Humboldt visited the city, and he was just floored. He was so struck by the opulence of the architecture, the huge churches, the fancy private homes. He wrote that it could easily rival any capital in Europe.
That's high praise. But I think the sources note that while he made it famous, he might not have actually coined the term himself.
That's a great little historical nuance. It seems an English politician, Charles Latrobe, might have actually written it first in the 1830s. And he wrote with a bit of irony about the luxurious city of palaces, which has risen from the clay-built ruins of Tenochtitlan. That one phrase just perfectly captures the whole story.
Opulence built on top of ruins.
Exactly.
And that's the formal historical view.
Yeah.
But if you're actually from CDMX, what do you call yourself?
You might be called a Chilango if you're a man, or a Chilanga for a woman. And the city itself is sometimes called Chilangolandia.
Chilangolandia. I like that.
But the term has this really interesting social dynamic. Outside of Mexico City, especially in the provinces, Chilango is often used as an insult.
But what? What does it imply?
It kind of implies someone who is loud, arrogant, maybe a bit rude. It's that classic provincial resentment of the big, powerful capital.
But the locals have embraced it.
Oh, they absolutely have. Residents of CDMX often use the term with a ton of pride. They've internalized it. That perceived brashness becomes a sign of their resilience, their big city savvy.
And they have their own term for everyone else, right?
They do. They'll call people from outside the capital residents of La Provincia, the provinces. It's a classic urban versus rural thing. And the funny part is, the neutral formal term, capitalino, is almost never used in conversation.
So that really sets the stage for this place full of complexity, high culture, deep history, all rubbing up against this very modern, very assertive urban identity. To get how that was forged, we have to start at the beginning, the foundations.
We really do. Because Mexico City has this monumental historical distinction that I think often gets overlooked.
What's that?
It is the oldest continuously inhabited capital city in the entire Americas. And on top of that, it's one of only 2 capitals in the Americas founded by indigenous peoples.
The other being Quito.
The other being Quito.
That fact alone just completely reframes its importance, doesn't it? It wasn't just some convenient spot colonizers picked. It was an ancient, powerful city that the Spanish decided to seize.
Exactly. The city was founded by the Mexica people, who we usually call the Aztecs. They established their city, Tenochtitlan, on a group of islands right in the middle of Lake Texcoco. This was around 1325 or 1327.
And they didn't just pick this spot randomly. It was chosen because of a deeply symbolic religious legend.
That's the core of the whole foundation myth. According to their tradition, their main god, Huitzilopochtli, told them to settle where they saw a very specific sign.
The eagle on the cactus.
The golden eagle on a prickly pear cactus devouring a rattlesnake. They saw that sign on a small marshy island, and that's where they founded Tenochtitlan. And that image is so powerful, it's still the central symbol on Mexico's national flag today.
The sheer audacity of building a city on a marshy island is just mind-boggling. What made it so sophisticated when the Spanish showed up?
By the time Cortés arrived in 1519, Tenochtitlan was the heart of the Aztec Empire, which stretched from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the Pacific. And its sophistication was all about engineering. The Mexica controlled the floodwaters with this massive 10-mile-long defensive barrier, a dike, that separated the salty water of the main lake from the fresh water they needed for the city.
And this is where the famous chinampas, the floating gardens, come in.
Precisely. They were these incredibly productive agricultural plots they made by layering mud and vegetation. They had totally mastered hydroengineering. When Cortés first saw it, Tenochtitlan was one of the largest cities in the world, much bigger than any European city at the time.
The scale of that civilization must have made the conquest that followed incredibly brutal.
The brutality was comprehensive. Cortés, with the help of thousands of indigenous allies who hated the Aztecs, started the siege of Tenochtitlan in May 1521. For 3 months, the city was starved, cut off from water, and just pounded by Spanish weapons.
And then disease played a huge part.
A devastating part. Smallpox, which the Europeans brought with them, had a death rate of up to 90% among the indigenous populations. It was a perfect storm of violence and biology.
So when the last Aztec ruler finally surrendered in August 1521, what was actually left of the capital?
Almost nothing. The sources say almost nothing. Cortés made a strategic call to basically raise the city during the final siege. The rebuilding, though, was incredibly fast.
Why so fast?
Political necessity. He had to consolidate Spanish power immediately. And rebuilding on the side of Tenochtitlan was a clear message. We conquer your center of power, and we're putting our new order right on top of it.
And that act, that superimposition, is what defines the historic center today. They used the old city's blueprint, but just built over it.
Absolutely. They kept the basic 4-quadrant layout of Tenochtitlan, but they leveled the old structures and built the Spanish power center right on top. The best example is the Zocalo, the main square.
Which was the Aztec ceremonial center.
Right, they demolished the Templo Mayor, the main temple, and they used its stones, its foundation, to build the massive metropolitan cathedral right beside it, and even partially over the ruins.
So it's historical layering made physical.
Yeah.
You can actually see it.
You literally can. When you visit today, you can see the excavated ruins of the Aztec temple right beneath the foundations of the colonial cathedral.
The amount of work required for that, the destruction and the construction in the 16th century, it's almost impossible to grasp.
It was a colossal forced effort, and we have an eyewitness account that really drives home the human cost.
What's that?
A Franciscan friar, Toribio de Benavente Motolinia, was one of the first missionaries, and he categorized the massive reconstruction effort, which relied on what was basically indigenous slave labor, as one of the 7 plagues of the early colonial period.
The 7th plague.
Yeah.
Building Mexico City. What made it so catastrophic, according to him?
He just painted this harrowing picture. He described crowds of laborers so huge you could barely move on the causeways. They had to tear down the old buildings, often just with their hands, and then build these massive new stone structures. He specifically noted how many died. He wrote, "Many died from being crushed by beams or falling from high places or in tearing down old buildings for new ones. It was just a brutal industrial-scale use of human labor to turn the Aztec capital into the capital of New Spain."
A tragic origin. But once it was established, it quickly became this magnet for wealth.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to that nickname, the City of Palaces.
It was a total magnet for capital. It was the administrative and cultural hub of the viceroyalty. All the wealth from the silver mines, the ports, the farms, it all flowed into the capital.
So noble families made their money elsewhere but spent it in the city.
Exactly. They built these extravagant homes, the palacios, they funded charities, commissioned art, imported luxury goods, and this all peaked in the late 18th century, which is when the city really cemented its reputation as a rival to Madrid or Paris in its splendor.
But all that splendor was built on layers of ruin and on ground that couldn't support it.
And that is the fundamental challenge that defines the modern city. Its unique and highly precarious geography.
Which is where things get really interesting.
The geography of CDMX is the source of pretty much all its problems, historical and modern.
So set the scene for us.
Okay, so the city is in the Valley of Mexico, high up on the Central Plateau. The elevation is significant, 2,240 meters, or about 7,350 feet. And it's in a basin, surrounded by these towering volcanic mountains.
High altitude, surrounded by mountains, it sounds like a perfect protected spot. So what's the paradox?
The paradox is water. The valley was a closed basin. All the water that flowed down from the mountains had no natural way to get out.
Ah, okay.
So this created a huge system of lakes, including Lake Texcoco. The Aztecs engineered ways to manage it, but when the Spanish destroyed those dikes, the flood risk came back with a vengeance.
So the Spanish inherited a city that was constantly flooding, and their solution was pretty drastic: drain the entire lake.
That was the only way they thought they could make it sustainable. They started these massive, centuries-long engineering projects called the desagüe, the drainage system.
Centuries long.
Yeah, starting in the 17th century, they literally cut through the mountains to create an artificial outlet for the water. It was an incredible feat of engineering for its time, and over the centuries, they completely drained Lake Texcoco.
Turning the lake bed into dry land for the city to grow.
Exactly. And that dry, former lake bed is the root of the city's existential crisis today: subsidence.
The ground is collapsing.
The ground is collapsing. The city rests on what is basically soft, saturated clay, ancient lake mud. As the city grew, it started pumping massive amounts of groundwater from the aquifer underneath that clay.
And when the water's gone, the clay compacts and the ground just drops.
That's it. And the data is terrifying.
Give us the numbers again, because they're really important.
In some central areas, since the start of the 20th century, the city has sunk up to 9 meters.
9 meters, that's almost 30 feet.
About 30 feet of vertical loss. And this isn't a historical problem, it's ongoing. In some parts of the historic center, it's still sinking at a rate of almost 50 centimeters
20 inches.
every single year.
Every year. That's just, I can't even wrap my head around that. How does that affect daily life? How does the infrastructure even function?
The consequences are a mess. First, you have structural damage. The sinking is uneven, so buildings lean and crack. The Metropolitan Cathedral, the Palacio de Bellas Artes, they're famous examples of this. But the biggest problem is for infrastructure that relies on gravity.
The sewage system.
The sewage system, it's a nightmare. It's supposed to flow downhill, right? But when the ground sinks at different rates, you end up with sections where the pipes actually have to move sewage uphill.
So it requires constant, expensive pumping.
Constant pumping, and it causes blockages. And worst of all, it brings back the original flood risk. When the heavy rains come, the city's ability to drain the water is severely limited, so you get chronic flooding.
So the battle against water, they thought they won by draining the lake. It just created a new vulnerability. And then, on top of all that, earthquakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That soft, saturated soil amplifies the shaking from an earthquake. It can turn a minor tremor into a catastrophe. The 1985 earthquake is the defining moment.
That quake was a turning point, wasn't it? Politically as much as physically.
Immensely. The physical damage was horrific, but the political fallout was what really changed things. The government, which was this monolithic one-party system, was just paralyzed.
How so?
The sources describe it as being overwhelmed by its own bureaucracy and corruption. They just failed to organize effective rescue efforts.
And the citizens stepped in.
The ordinary citizens stepped in. It was an organic, powerful response. Neighbors organized rescue brigades, dug through rubble, started rebuilding houses, often going directly against government orders.
Wow.
That event exposed the government's weakness, and it really lit a fire under a new era of civil society, of people demanding more control over their own city.
So geology and governance all colliding.
Yeah.
But in contrast to this sinking crisis, the city managed a truly remarkable environmental turnaround with its air quality.
It's an incredible success story. People who remember the city from the 80s or 90s just can't believe it. It was infamous for having some of the worst air pollution on Earth. Now it's a global model for how to fix it.
How big was the improvement?
It was huge. By 2014, levels of things like carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, they had dropped by 2/3 or more compared to the early 90s. The city's air quality is now comparable to a city like Los Angeles.
That kind of turnaround for a megacity that doesn't happen by accident. What did they do?
They attacked it on 3 fronts: transportation, industry, and policy. The most famous policy is the Hoy No Circula program.
1 day without a car.
Right. It restricts which cars can drive based on the last number of your license plate. To enforce it, cars have to pass strict emissions tests twice a year. If you don't pass, or if it's your day, you can't drive. Period.
And they invested heavily in public transit to give people an alternative.
Absolutely, that was key. They built out the massive Metrobus system bus rapid transit and the huge Ikobichi bike-sharing network. It was a multi-pronged approach that demanded both sacrifice from individuals and massive investment from the government.
That success really shows the city has the capacity for innovation when it needs it. Which brings us to its modern governance and economic power.
And its economic pull is just overwhelming. With 21.8 million people in the greater metro area, its dominance is just a given. It is the undisputed economic engine of Mexico.
What percentage of the national economy are we talking about here?
The city proper is responsible for about 15.8% of the country's GDP.
Just the city.
Just the city. And when you add the whole metro area, it's about 22% of the national GDP. And get this, if Mexico City were its own country back in 2013, its economy would have been the 5th largest in all of Latin America.
That is staggering. But this economy has changed a lot, right? It used to be an industrial center.
A huge industrial center. The shift was dramatic, and it was mostly fueled by the NAFTA agreement in the 90s. Back in 1980, half of all industrial jobs in Mexico were inside the city limits.
Half. So why did that manufacturing base leave?
It just got too expensive. Land prices went up, traffic was a nightmare, and the environmental regulations for the air quality cleanup made it costly to operate.
So manufacturing moved out and something else moved in.
Exactly. The city shifted to managing things instead of making them. It doubled down on services, finance, corporate headquarters, banking, tech. That move cemented CDMX as one of Latin America's most critical financial hubs.
And let's connect that economic power back to the political structure. That change from DF to CDMX wasn't just handed to them.
No, it was a decades-long struggle for self-determination. For most of its history, the president just appointed the city's leader. Residents had no direct vote.
And the 1985 earthquake was a major catalyst for change.
A huge catalyst. People started demanding control. They finally won the right to elect their head of government in 1997. And the ultimate achievement was that 2016 reform, which gave them their own constitution.
And that decentralized power in a big way.
Significantly.
Yeah.
The 16 boroughs, the alcaldías, got their own elected mayors with real budgetary power. It gave local communities way more control over their own neighborhoods.
But there's still one crucial legal limitation. It can't become a full state.
Right, and that's fundamental. The Constitution says it can't become a state as long as it's the seat of federal power. If it did, the capital would have to move somewhere else. So it has this unique, powerful, but always tied to the federation status.
And that autonomy has allowed it to become a laboratory for progressive social policy, way ahead of the rest of the country.
Absolutely. Since the late 90s, its politics have been much more liberal than the rest of Mexico. A huge example is reproductive rights.
Right.
Mexico City was the first federal entity to significantly expand abortion access, which was a massive departure from traditional law.
And it was also a trailblazer on LGBTQ plus rights in the region.
A total trailblazer. In 2009, it became the first city in all of Latin America to legalize same-sex marriage. That set a critical precedent. They've also pioneered things like no-fault divorce and legal gender change. It's consistently been a progressive bulwark.
Given all that, how diverse is the population?
It's deeply diverse. Internally, it's a major hub for indigenous groups migrating from rural areas. The most common indigenous languages you'll hear are Nahuatl, Otomi, and Mixtec.
And what about internationally?
It's huge. The capital has one of the world's largest expat communities. It's estimated to have the largest population of Americans living outside the U.S.
Really? How many?
The numbers are as high as 700,000. They're drawn by the economy, the cost of living, and, of course, the city's powerful cultural magnetism.
That vast scale requires an equally impressive cultural scene to match. Let's dive into what defines the CDMX experience. Its culture, cuisine, and connectivity.
When you talk culture in Mexico City, you're really talking about density and volume. The city has about 170 museums. That number alone puts it in the top 10 cities globally for museum density. You could spend a lifetime just exploring them.
And a lot of these landmarks are themselves evidence of the city's geological struggle.
Absolutely. The Palacio de Bellas Artes, that beautiful white marble opera house, is the perfect example. It is literally gradually sinking into the soft lake bed under its own weight.
A beautiful casualty of subsidence.
Exactly. It's a living demonstration of that conflict between architecture and geology.
So what are the absolute can't-miss cultural spots?
Oh, there are so many, but 3 stand out. First, the National Museum of Anthropology. It's world-renowned. It houses the famous Aztec calendar stone, the Sunstone.
Right.
Second, the Museo Samaya. Its architecture is incredible, and it holds the largest private collection of original Rodin sculptures outside of France.
The largest private collection of Rodin in Mexico City. That's astonishing.
It really speaks to the private wealth there. And third, you have the great muralists, Rivera, Siqueiros, Orozco. Their massive politically charged murals are all over public buildings like the National Palace. And of course, you have Frida Kahlo's home, the Casa Azul in Coyoacán.
And UNESCO has recognized the city's importance as well.
It has. CDMX has 3 distinct UNESCO World Heritage Sites, which is incredibly rare for one city. You have the Historic Center, the floating gardens of Xochimilco, and the main campus of the UNAM University.
Okay, let's pivot to food. The culinary scene is globally recognized now, but it has this incredible balance of high-end dining and historic street food.
That balance is what makes it so great. The formal recognition really came in 2024 when 7 city restaurants got Michelin stars, and the restaurant Pujol is consistently ranked one of the best in the world.
But the daily reality for millions is markets and tacos.
That's the real pulse of the city. The food traditions go back centuries. Take the taco. In the 19th century, it was considered simple, plebeian fare, but now it's everything. And CDMX is where tacos al pastor came from.
Which is that fusion of Lebanese shawarma techniques with local ingredients.
Exactly. From immigrants in the 1930s. And the markets that feed the city are on another level.
What kind of scale are we talking?
The Central de Abasto is the main produce market for the whole city. It's a massive 204/7 operation. And then La Nueva Viga market is the second largest seafood market in the world.
Second only to Tsukiji in Japan.
Second only to Tsukiji.
And what about the traditional drinking culture?
That's where you find the pulquerias. They're these working-class bars that serve pulque, a traditional drink made from fermented maguey sap. They have this very distinct traditional vibe that's a world away from the high-end cocktail bars.
So to move all those people and all that food around, you need a massive transit system.
And CDMX has one of the best in the region. The metro is the largest in Latin America. It's got 12 lines, 195 stations,
And it moves how many people a day?
an astonishing 4.4 million people every single day. It's the city's circulatory system.
And they've made a big push to integrate everything recently.
They have. All public transport, the metro, Metrobus, trolleybuses, are under one unified system now. Makes it much easier to get around. And the Eco-Beachy bike-sharing system is the second largest in North America.
Finally, we can't talk about a global capital without talking about sports.
And its sporting footprint is monumental. The Azteca Stadium seats over 91,000 fans. It's the largest in Latin America.
It's historic.
It's incredibly historic. Mexico City is the only Latin American city to ever host the Summer Olympics back in '68. And the Azteca is the first stadium in history to host two separate FIFA World Cup finals.
1970 and 1986.
Exactly. And they continue to host huge events like the NFL, Formula One. The sheer scope of life in the city is just unmatched.
This deep dive has really revealed that Mexico City isn't just defined by transformation, but by resilience. It's a place constantly shaped by these overlapping identities. The spiritual center of the Mexica, the glittering capital of New Spain, the progressive heart of a modern nation, and this economic engine for Latin America. It's a city that has just had to learn to adapt to political upheaval and this constant terrifying pressure of sinking ground.
I think the underlying story of CDMX is really a physical conflict between water and land. It's always been there.
Right.
From the moment the Mexica built dikes to manage the lake, through the centuries of Spanish projects to drain it, it's always been about humans trying to engineer the environment, and the consequences of that engineering, the subsidence, that's still the greatest test of the city's endurance.
We saw the success they had with air quality, but the water crisis, the sinking, that's the existential threat. So what does this mean for the future?
Well, the source material mentions this conceptual project, a plan called Recovering the City of Lakes. It's an ambitious ecological plan to reintroduce natural water sources, create new wetlands, and basically improve the water supply and air quality by partially restoring the old ecosystem.
So embracing the water again instead of fighting it.
Exactly. So considering the city's founding conflict with water and the continuous problem of subsidence, we have to ask the critical question. How might a project like that, one that tries to reverse centuries of human intervention, fundamentally change the physical fate and the future identity of CDMX?
That is a powerful thought to take away, as the Capital de la Transformación just keeps evolving and fighting for its very foundation. Thank you for diving deep with us. I want you to imagine standing in a dark, totally trackless forest.
Oh, and a freezing one at that.
Exactly. It's November 1939. The temperature is so impossibly cold that, like, the engine blocks of vehicles are just freezing solid.
Yeah, right in the middle of the woods.
Right. And you are waiting for an army of 500,000 men and, I mean, thousands of tanks to cross the border.
It's
It
terrifying.
really is. A massive global superpower is invading its tiny neighbor, and they fully expect to be parading through the capital city in 2 weeks.
But instead of a parade, they walk straight into a 105-day frozen hell.
Yeah, they really did. And we're pulling from a comprehensive historical overview for this deep dive today. So we're looking at, declassified Soviet archives, finished frontline accounts, and broader geopolitical analyses.
Which is such a fascinating mix of sources.
It is. And the mission here is to unpack exactly how this severe underdog held the line against an absolute juggernaut.
Because it remains one of the most stunning miscalculations in modern military history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Winter War. The 1939 to 1940 conflict between the Soviet Union and Finland. We are going to examine the mechanical reality of their desperate tactics.
And really explore how this relatively short, isolated conflict inadvertently reshaped the grand strategy of World War II.
So to really understand the mechanics of what happened in those freezing forests, we first have to look at the geopolitical chessboard, right?
Yeah. Before the shooting starts, we have to establish why the Soviet Union, which was already a massive empire, was so obsessed with the borders of a small Nordic country.
It came down to a very specific geographic vulnerability, didn't it?
It did, yeah. That vulnerability was the city of Leningrad, which we know today as St. Petersburg.
Okay, right.
In 1939, Leningrad sat a mere 32 kilometers, so that's about 20 miles from the Finnish border.
That is basically commuting distance.
Exactly. And Joseph Stalin was looking at the rising threat of Nazi Germany in Europe, and he was terrified that this proximity made the city indefensible.
Because if a hostile power used Finland as a staging ground, artillery could hit Leningrad almost immediately.
Yeah, the Soviet mindset relied really heavily on this concept of geographic depth. They viewed the extended borders of the old Tsarist Russian Empire as a necessary buffer zone to, absorb any invasion.
Which makes sense from a purely defensive standpoint.
Well, in late 1939, the Soviets and Nazi Germany had signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
Right, the infamous non-aggression treaty.
On paper, yeah. But the secret protocols of that treaty divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, placing Finland firmly in the Soviet sphere.
Wow.
So having just secured Eastern Poland, Stalin turned his attention north to secure that buffer for Leningrad.
But he didn't just order the tanks across the border on day one, right?
Correct.
He tried diplomatic strong-arming first.
He did. The Soviets invited Finnish representatives to Moscow and essentially demanded a massive land swap.
Right.
They wanted the Finns to move their border 30 kilometers further away from Leningrad, hand over several islands in the Gulf of Finland, and lease them a naval base.
And what did they offer in return?
They offered twice as much land further north in Karelia.
Which, I mean, if you merely look at the acreage, offering twice as much land seems like a diplomatic compromise.
Sure, on a map.
But the Finns vehemently refused. Because it's like asking a neighbor to voluntarily demolish the load-bearing wall of their house to give you a better view, and then offering them an empty lot down the street in exchange.
That is a perfect analogy. The land the Soviets demanded wasn't just arbitrary territory, it contained the Mannerheim Line.
Ah, okay.
That was Finland, the primary defensive fortification network across the Karelian Isthmus. Giving that up would essentially strip them of their only physical barrier against a Soviet ground invasion.
Which they knew was a real threat.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Furthermore, the Finnish government was closely watching the Baltic states, so Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania.
Right. What was happening there?
Well, the Soviets had just pressured them into signing these mutual assistance pacts, allowing military bases on their soil. The Finns correctly identified that as the first step toward total annexation.
So they knew that giving up that defensive infrastructure meant giving up their sovereignty.
Exactly. And when the diplomatic talks inevitably hit a brick wall, the Soviets basically decided to manufacture a reason to invade.
Right. And this brings us to November 26, 1939.
Yes. Soviet border guards in the village of Manila were suddenly hit by artillery fire.
And the Soviet Union immediately blamed Finnish artillery.
Right. They claimed it was a provocation and demanded the Finns pull their troops back from the border.
But wait, if the Finns knew they were, hopelessly outgunned, it makes zero sense for them to randomly fire artillery at a Soviet border town.
It makes absolutely no sense.
So how do we eventually confirm what actually happened there?
Well, we didn't have undeniable proof until decades later. When the Soviet Union collapsed and their state archives were finally declassified, historians found the direct orders.
Oh, wow.
It was a textbook false flag operation. The Soviet secret police, the NKVD, fired artillery on their own troops to manufacture a casus belli.
A legal justification for war.
Exactly.
The fact that they shot their own people just to manufacture a border dispute proves they had zero intention of stopping at that Mannerheim line we talked about.
No intention at all.
And we see that confirmed just days later, right?
Yeah.
Because they launched the invasion on November 30th and immediately set up a puppet government.
The Finnish Democratic Republic.
Right, which was meant to take over the entire country.
The intention of regime change was undeniably clear from the start. They had even commissioned a celebratory piece of music from the composer Dmitri Shostakovich.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, it was intended to be performed as the Red Army paraded through Helsinki in time for Stalin's 60th birthday in late December.
That is just astounding hubris. They expected a walkover.
To be fair, the sheer mismatch in numbers explains that confidence.
Yeah, let's talk about those numbers. The Red Army deployed something like 2,500 to 3,000 tanks and almost 4,000 aircraft.
Unbelievable numbers for the time.
And Finland had, what, exactly 32 tanks?
Yes, and most of them were obsolete Renault from World War I without properly fitted weapons.
Oh, man. And they had just over 100 combat-ready planes.
That's it.
So you have 500,000 Soviet troops rolling into a country defended by around 300,000 Finns, many of whom were just hastily recalled civilian reservists.
So on paper, it is a mathematical inevitability. But mathematics doesn't account for friction, and the Soviet military apparatus was generating its own friction before they even fired a shot.
Because of the purges, right?
Exactly. The Red Army was suffering terribly from Stalin's Great Purges. Out of sheer political paranoia, he had executed or imprisoned thousands of his most competent, experienced military officers.
Now, if you're listening to this and wondering how losing upper management affects the actual soldier in the snow, you really have to look at the dual command structure Stalin put in place to ensure loyalty.
It was a disaster. The experienced officers were replaced by inexperienced political yes-men.
And that dual command structure was fatal.
Yeah, a Soviet unit commander was not allowed to adapt to the situation on the ground without the explicit countersignature of a political commissar.
And this commissar is a guy whose only qualification was loyalty to the Communist Party.
Right. So if a commander wanted to flank an enemy position, but the commissar felt that deviating from the central plan was somehow defeatist, the maneuver was vetoed.
Which naturally leads to incredibly rigid, predictable tactics.
Very rigid. The Soviet doctrine of the time was heavily influenced by German blitzkrieg tactics in Central Europe. They relied on massive mechanized pushes down paved roads and open plains.
But Finland isn't Central Europe.
No, Finland is a trackless wilderness of dense pine forests, thousands of lakes, and deep swamps.
And the staggering hubris of trying to force a blitzkrieg through an Arctic forest resulted in scenes that are almost hard to believe.
Like the 44th Rifle Division.
Yes.
Yeah.
They were so certain of a rapid victory that they literally brought a full brass band with them to the front line for their anticipated victory parade.
It's tragic, honestly.
They marched right into the snow in dark khaki uniforms, hauling tubas and trumpets.
Meanwhile, the Finns recognized immediately that they could not meet this mechanized force head-on. Culturally, they leaned into a concept called sisu.
Sisu.
Oh.
How would you translate that?
Well, while it lacks a direct English translation, it essentially means extraordinary determination, guts, and an unyielding spirit in the face of impossible odds.
I love that.
And they paired that psychological resilience with deep environmental adaptation.
Which was born out of pure necessity. Because the Finnish military was so small, they didn't even have enough standard issue uniforms to go around, right?
Yeah, the soldiers simply wore their own layered civilian winter clothes and threw cheap white bedsheets or snow capes over them.
Making them practically invisible in the forest.
Exactly. By moving on cross-country skis, they could glide silently through the deep snow, completely bypassing the few dirt roads the Soviet columns were hopelessly confined to.
This mobility allowed them to get incredibly close to the Soviet armor.
And since Finland had almost no anti-tank guns, they had to invent close-quarters methods to stop a 10-ton armored vehicle.
Which sounds impossible.
A soldier would literally ski up to a moving tank and jam a log or a crowbar into the treads to immobilize it.
Wow. And once the tank was stuck, they introduced fire.
The Molotov cocktail.
Yes. The mechanics behind this improvised weapon are brilliant, but the name itself is pure, weaponized Finnish sarcasm.
It really is.
When the Soviet Air Force started indiscriminately bombing the Finnish capital, Helsinki, the Soviet Foreign Minister, Vyacheslav Molotov, went on international radio.
And he made an outrageous claim.
He brazenly claimed that Soviet planes were not dropping bombs, but rather humanitarian food drops for the starving Finnish people.
So the Finns immediately started referring to the cluster bombs as Molotov's bread baskets.
Right. So when the Finnish troops started mass-producing glass bottles to destroy the tanks, they figured they should provide a drink to go with the food.
I mean, the dark humor is amazing.
It's so good. The mixture wasn't just simple gasoline, though. It was a specific mix of gasoline and thick tar, capped with a rag fuse.
The tar was the key ingredient.
Yeah. When the bottle shattered against the engine vents of a Soviet tank, the tar made the flaming liquid stick to the metal.
And as the fire burned, it consumed all the oxygen around the engine intake.
Literally suffocating the engine to death while igniting the fuel lines. And they called them Molotov cocktails.
But, destroying a few tanks with bottles doesn't dismantle an army of 500,000 men.
No, it doesn't.
To understand how the Finns systematically broke down a force 10 times their size, we have to look at how they weaponized the freezing wilderness itself.
The environment.
Right. The winter of 1939 to 1940 was one of the coldest on record. Temperatures plummeted to minus 43 degrees Celsius.
Which is about minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit for our U.S. listeners.
Just unimaginably cold.
Hold on. I was reading through the Finnish frontline accounts we gathered, and Modi, the name of the famous tactic they used to destroy these columns, isn't some clinical military term, is it?
No, it's not.
Doesn't it literally translate to chopped firewood?
It does, and it paints a dark, highly accurate picture of the reality on the ground.
How
Well, the Soviet motorized columns were restricted to the few narrow logging roads cutting through the deep forests. Because of the terrain, a single division's column could stretch out for miles.
Right, they're just stuck in a line.
So the Finns, moving swiftly on skis through the surrounding woods, would launch sudden ambushes to fell massive trees across the road at the very front and the very back of the Soviet line.
They'd trap them in a single file line,
Exactly.
and then they would ski down the flanks of the trapped column and fell more trees to segment the line into smaller, isolated pockets.
They were looking at a living human column and methodically chopping it into blocks of wood to be burned and destroyed piecemeal.
It's so brutal.
It was a survivalist war. Once a column was chopped into these motes, the Finns rarely wasted their limited manpower attacking the heavily defended pockets directly.
They just let the cold do the work.
Exactly. They let the thermodynamics of the environment do the heavy lifting. If a Soviet soldier stopped moving in minus 43-degree weather, he would freeze to death.
But if you tried to light a fire,
If he tried to light a fire to stay warm, or if the unit tried to run their vehicle engines for heat, the light and sound made them perfect targets for the Finnish troops waiting in the dark tree line.
that psychological terror wasn't just the cold and the dark, it was the fact that the forest itself seemed to be shooting at them.
Because once a column was immobilized, the Finnish snipers went to work.
And this is the environment that produced Simo Heihe.
Yes.
Yeah.
A Finnish farmer turned sniper who was dubbed the White Death.
He operated totally alone in the freezing temperatures, dressed entirely in white, and he used a standard rifle without a telescopic sight.
The choice to use iron sights was a very calculated survival mechanism.
Why is that?
A glass scope can catch the glare of the sun and reveal a sniper's position. Furthermore, in those temperatures, breath condensation would freeze on the glass, rendering a scope completely useless.
Oh, that makes total sense.
He would even pack snow into his mouth before taking a shot so the heat of his breath wouldn't be visible in the frigid air.
That is just incredible dedication. And he is credited with over 500 confirmed kills.
Unmatched in sniper history.
The Battle of Rate Road really stands as the ultimate masterclass of this strategy, doesn't it?
It does. That Soviet 44th Division, the ones who brought the brass band, they were strung out along a narrow forest road.
And a significantly smaller Finnish force, led by Colonel Hjalmar Sillasvu, completely cut their retreat.
They chopped the massive division into multiple modules and systematically annihilated them over several days.
The numbers from that battle are insane. The Soviets suffered somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000 casualties.
While the Finns lost about 400 men.
And crucially, they captured dozens of tanks, artillery pieces, and desperately needed ammunition from the frozen Soviet columns.
But as incredibly resourceful as these tactics were, asymmetric warfare has a breaking point.
Right. Clever ambushes and bravery can only delay the brutal mathematics of industrial war. They cannot reverse it.
Precisely. By February 1940, the Soviet Union realized that political ideology was losing the war. Stalin was furious, and he was humiliated.
So what did he do?
He placed General Semyon Timoshenko in charge, and Timoshenko instituted a massive pragmatic shift in Soviet strategy.
Because he recognized that sending tank columns deep into the trackless forest to be chopped into firewood was a fool's errand.
Right. Timoshenko pulled his forces back, regrouped, and completely abandoned the blitzkrieg maneuvering.
And where did he focus instead?
He concentrated an overwhelming mass of forces on the Karelian Isthmus. This was the flattest, most direct route to the Finnish heartland, and of course the site of the Mannerheim Line.
So he leaned entirely into the one advantage the Soviets had.
Infinite industrial firepower.
Yeah.
He established a combined arms approach, ensuring that infantry, armor, and artillery were deeply coordinated, which was a massive departure from the disjointed pushes of the previous months.
And then on February 1st, the Red Army unleashed a bombardment of truly unimaginable scale.
They fired 300,000 artillery shells into the Finnish defensive positions in a single 24-hour period.
Just trying to comprehend the concussive reality of 300,000 shells is horrifying.
It physically alters the geography.
Yeah, the sheer kinetic energy of that barrage pulverized the concrete bunkers and collapsed the trench networks of the Mannerheim Line.
And under the constant cover of this artillery, the Soviet infantry and armor began a slow, methodical grind forward.
But the Finnish defenders fought with astonishing desperation.
They really did. They would take shelter deep underground during the daylight bombardments and then work frantically through the freezing night to rebuild their shattered trenches before the dawn assaults.
But the relentless pressure exposed Finland's fatal weakness.
A lack of logistical depth.
They were simply running out of physical matter. Artillery units were literally ordered to hold their fire unless there was a direct massed ground attack, because they had no shells left.
And the men in the trenches were exhausted fighting for weeks without sleep, and there were no reinforcements to replace the dead and wounded.
The front line was buckling, and the Finnish government recognized that total military collapse was imminent.
They had to seek terms.
So on March 12, 1940, the Moscow Peace Treaty was signed, ending the hostilities.
The terms dictated by Stalin were incredibly harsh. Finland was forced to cede 9% of its total territory to the Soviet Union.
This included Viipuri, their second largest city, and a massive portion of their industrial capacity.
Which was actually substantially more territory than the Soviets had originally demanded during the diplomatic talks in 1939.
The human cost of that treaty reshaped the demographics of the country practically overnight.
It was devastating. Over 400,000 Karelians, representing 12% of Finland's entire population, were forced to pack up whatever they could carry on sleds and evacuate deep into the new Finnish borders.
They chose to abandon their ancestral homes rather than live under Soviet occupation.
Yeah.
When you look at that outcome, losing 9% of your land, your industrial center, and suffering tens of thousands of casualties, it begs the ultimate so what question.
Right. Did Finland actually achieve anything by fighting?
Exactly. Did they win anything?
Well, if you measure victory strictly by acreage, it was a defeat. But when you place the Winter War in the broader geopolitical context of 1940s Europe, the outcome was an astonishing preservation of the state.
Because look at the alternatives.
Exactly. Consider the fate of the Baltic states or Poland. They were entirely absorbed, their governments dissolved, and their populations subjected to mass deportations.
But because the Finnish military made the invasion so incredibly costly in Soviet blood and treasure, Stalin concluded that occupying the entire country would result in an endless, agonizing insurgency.
So he settled for the territorial buffer he originally wanted, and Finland remained an independent, sovereign democracy.
The guns fell silent in March 1940, but the 105-day conflict immediately altered the grand strategy of the major world powers.
Oh, massively. This tiny, isolated war in the Arctic Circle set off a global ripple effect that changed the entire timeline of World War II.
First, it exposed the profound disorganization of the Allied powers.
Right. France and Britain had publicly debated sending expeditionary forces to aid Finland, but their plans were convoluted, bogged down by logistical nightmares, and secretly motivated by a desire to occupy Swedish iron ore mines to cut off German supply lines.
Rather than actually fighting the Soviets.
Exactly. And the Allied failure to intervene caused a political crisis that actually resulted in the collapse of the French government.
But the most consequential ripple effect took place in Berlin.
Yes, Adolf Hitler and the German High Command were studying the Winter War obsessively.
They watched the massive Red Army, with its thousands of tanks and aircraft, get utterly humiliated by a fraction of their number in ski troops.
And Hitler looked at this performance and concluded that the Soviet Union was, in his own words, a rotten structure.
He became convinced that if Germany kicked in the door, the entire Soviet apparatus would instantly collapse.
That specific observation directly accelerated Hitler's timeline for Operation Barbarossa.
The catastrophic German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941.
He wildly underestimated Soviet resilience, basing his military projections almost entirely on the Red Army's disastrous early performance in the Finnish snow.
And the historical irony there is profound for you as a listener to really digest. The Winter War convinced Hitler that the Soviets were weak enough to invade, but the humiliating defeats in Finland were exactly the wake-up call Stalin needed.
Absolutely. After the treaty with Finland, the Soviets painfully realized their doctrines were fundamentally broken.
So they reduced the meddling power of the political commissars, reinstated experienced military officers, and drastically overhauled their winter warfare tactics and logistical supply chains.
The war that made Hitler confident enough to invade the Soviet Union is the exact catalyst that forced the Soviet Union to implement the military reforms necessary to survive that invasion.
If the Red Army had faced the German Wehrmacht in 1941 with the same rigid, politically paralyzed command structure they utilized in Finland in 1939, well, the Eastern Front and the outcome of World War II would likely have looked entirely different.
It is an incredibly potent narrative of geopolitical arrogance meeting unparalleled resilience.
A superpower expects a 2-week parade, brings a brass band, and walks into a frozen meat grinder against a nation of farmers and foresters defending their homes.
It serves as a permanent historical testament to how extreme terrain, severe weather, and absolute desperation can act as massive force multipliers, neutralizing overwhelming technological superiority.
But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, something that severely complicates the romantic underdog story we usually prefer in history.
And this is an important point.
Think about the agonizing moral compromises forced upon a desperate nation. After the brutal Moscow Peace Treaty, Finland was left geopolitically isolated, terrified, and acutely aware that the Western allies were incapable of helping them.
They knew the Soviet Union might return to finish the job.
Picture yourself in that situation, watching the map of Europe turn dark. What would you do to ensure your country's survival?
It is a state of terrifying vulnerability.
And that exact vulnerability is what pushed democratic Finland into a highly controversial military co-belligerence with Nazi Germany just 15 months later.
Yeah.
During what is known as the Continuation War, as they attempted to win back their lost Karelian territory.
It's a stark reminder.
It proves that in the desperation of global conflicts, the line between good guys and bad guys is rarely written in black and white. It is usually written in the desperate shades of survival. It leaves you wondering, standing in that freezing, trackless forest, entirely surrounded by wolves, who do you invite in to help you fight them off?